Tonight, the convicted sex offender Hadush Kebatu tells Sky News police ignored him when he tried to hand himself in after his mistaken release.
Saturday, I get a police. Look here. Please, I am wanted man. I arrested. I will give you my hand. Please help him. Where is police station? He ignored me. He drive.
Kebatu spoke to us from Ethiopia, where he was deported overnight with £500 of public money, 2 days after he was found and rearrested in London. The government announced a crackdown on illegal working, but can they get control of an asylum and immigration system beset by crisis? I'll speak to the Migration Minister, Mike Tabb. The Prime Minister and Tory leader clash in the Commons as Keir Starmer does not rule out raising taxes in the budget later this month. A step on the road to justice for those caught up in the post office failure that predates the Horizon scandal. But victims criticise a two-tier compensation scheme. We speak exclusively to the Post Office Minister. And as Robert Jenrick and other senior Tories give their support to a bid by Nigel Farage to leave the ECHR, are we seeing the first stirrings of a move to unite the right? Our Tom Baldwin and Mercy Moroki will be a model of unity, of course. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday. I'm Trevor Phillips, live from Westminster. And this is the Politics Hub. Good evening. Hadush Kebatu, the convicted sex offender who was mistakenly freed from prison last week, has told Sky News that he tried to hand himself into police a day before he was arrested, but was ignored by officers. Kebatu was deported to his home country of Ethiopia last night, 4 days after officers at Chelmsford prison released him in error, instead of sending him to an immigration centre. He spent 2 days at large before being arrested in North London on Sunday morning. Kebatu was also repeatedly questioned on his appalling crimes, but Sky News has chosen not to broadcast the denials of a convicted sex offender in this interview. Our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter, reports.
As he climbed up the aircraft steps at Heathrow, convicted sex offender Hadush Kebatu was being kicked out of Britain. Sky News understands he'd just been paid £500 of government money, a payment the Home Office removals team made to speed up his deportation. When he landed in Ethiopia, he agreed to speak to Sky News. We asked him what happened when prison staff released him by mistake last Friday. For hours, he wandered around outside Chelmsford prison, asking people where he should go.
Who can responsible for me? Where is Home Office? Where is the immigrant? I will tell them, but also all of the experts are ignored me. And also, the time it should be fast. I am homeless. I am not eating at that time. Somebody, they are pass. Where is the station? Where is the train station? Someone helped me. I will take the ticket, £18.
On Saturday, we spoke exclusively to a delivery driver who witnessed what happened at the prison and spoke to Kebatu.
He walked out of the airlock. He then kept returning back to the airlock and basically saying to the officers there, where am I going? What am I doing? They basically were almost sending him away. It's like, go. You've been released. You go.
And so began a 48-hour manhunt stretching across London for a man convicted of sex offences against a 14-year-old girl, just days after he'd arrived on a small boat across the Channel. A case that prompted widespread protests. On Friday evening, after his release, still in his grey prison tracksuit, he was in a library in Dalston, East London. The following day, Kebatu claims he tried to hand himself in.
On the morning, Saturday, I get a police. Look here. Please, I am wanted man. I arrested. I will give you my hand. Please help him. Where is police station? He ignored me. He drive But also, I am not unknown. The police station, where is the place? I am not Google it, but also I get the police. I will give you my hand. Please help me. Where is the police station? Take me. My name is Hadush Kebatu. I am national of Ethiopia. Please, I want the mistake release from Chelmsford prison. Please help me.
He was eventually arrested after a member of the public spotted him in Finsbury Park, North London, the next day, on Sunday morning. Responding to Kebatu's claims, the Metropolitan Police told Sky News the Met is not aware of any evidence to support the claims that Kebatu approached officers on Saturday morning. The actions of officers who responded to the sighting of him on Sunday morning show how seriously they were taking the manhunt. Kebatu's actions on the morning of his arrest were more like those of someone trying to avoid officers, not trying to hand himself in. They are two differing accounts within this deeply embarrassing episode for the government. On Sunday, the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary David Lammy thanked the police officers who had arrested him. The Ministry of Justice has reiterated that it welcomes the deportation and have started a full investigation into what happened. Sky News has chosen not to broadcast other parts of Kebatu's interview. He's been removed from the country as a convicted sex offender. How the authorities managed that process is under huge scrutiny. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
When William Shakespeare wrote his great farce, The Comedy of Errors, which involves a series of ludicrous, barely believable coincidences and cases of mistaken identities, I don't imagine he was making a point about immigration policy. He was just trying to be funny. But many of his plot lines, people landing on foreign shores and so forth, could well have prefigured the past few days. Last week, the government discovered that someone they thought they'd thrown out of the country had boomeranged back on a small boat. Tonight, as we've been reporting, immigration officials handed a child molester a 500 quid bung to get on a plane to Addis Ababa, and that very place that he told police he wanted to go anyway. Well, the public reaction has moved from incredulity to scorn to mockery. The government is just 4 weeks away from its biggest moment of the autumn, Rachel Reeves's budget. Nothing could be more serious. But it's hard to hear any debate about tax rises and welfare cuts above the noise of Britain laughing at its own government. The Prime Minister's a football fan. He will no doubt be sensing that with an electorate that was already grumbling that nothing works in this country anymore, we're only one more cock-up away from the crowds beginning to sing the old football chant, "You don't know what you're doing," and its B-side, "You're getting sacked in the morning." Well, earlier I spoke to the Migration Minister, Mike Tapp. I started by asking him about news this evening that the government had sealed a migration agreement with Vietnam. Mike Tapp, the government's announcing a returns deal with Vietnam. What is it?
Yeah, this is really good news coming out this evening around essentially making it easier to return individuals that arrive here illegally or overstayers to go back to Vietnam, and it helps us deport more. Now, we've already deported 35,000, that's growing, including an increase of 14% on foreign national offenders. That's the direction this government's going, and the more these returns agreements, the better.
Well, I want to talk to you about the scale of that, but what sort of numbers do you think this might deliver? I mean, how many overstayers or illegals do we think are from Vietnam?
There are a significant number. I can't give you the exact figure that come over from Vietnam, but it goes up and down. So sometimes we'll see that spiking, and then it depends where the gangs are at with their operations. At the moment, it's important that we're ensuring we can return as many people as possible, and this deal will help with that.
All right. Well, look, there is one particular returnee who's occupied a lot of public attention in the last few days. Mr. Kebatu has now gone back to Ethiopia. Was it right, in effect, to bribe him with public money?
So it's really tough, and I understand why the public, on the face of it, don't like this, because neither do I, to be quite frank with you, Trevor. But let's just explain what's gone on here. So we needed to deport this man. It was a top priority to ensure that he is no longer a risk to the British public, and that was the priority. Now, the officers on the ground dealing with these deportations and removals have complete operational independence from us ministers sat in the Home Office, and they assessed that 500 quid will ensure that he's peaceful on the flight, so that they don't have to drag him off, put him in detention and then charter a new flight which will cost the taxpayers £8,000. So it's a trade-off between £500 and £8,000. It's difficult to stomach, but he's gone and he can't pose a risk to the British public.
Yeah, but, you know, there is an issue here, isn't there? This sets a precedent. If you're an illegal immigrant, Britain wants to get rid of you, OK, you're going to go, but you threaten to make a fuss and they'll stuff your pocket with a few hundred quid.
Well, actually, successive governments have used this method for voluntary returns.
I know, there's a separate
programme.
programme.
And the reason for that...
There is a separate programme which is called facilitated removals.
Yeah.
But this is different. This was purely... it was a bung. And is that right? There's something... I mean, there's something wrong about this. And frankly, once it gets around, that's what you're going to do. You're going to end up giving 500 quid bungs to hundreds of people, maybe thousands, if you get your returns policy right.
It's not different in the fact that successive governments have used money to ensure that the deportations and removals are quicker and less of a cost to the British taxpayers, because they don't have to accommodate them and fight those legal battles. Now, I'm infuriated, as is the Home Secretary, by the number of migrants who are abusing the legal system with, for example, claiming suddenly that they're a victim of slavery just before they're deported. So we're looking at that to reform that, and we're looking at the ECHR so we can continue to deport more.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister says he's appalled, the Justice Secretary says he's livid, you're furious and all that. Everybody's got emotions.
We're acting on it.
But you do realise that the public emotions have moved from incredulity that what happened last week could happen, including, by the way, the bloke we sent back to France, who then bounced back here. And the public reactions moved from incredulity to anger, and now, frankly, to mockery, which is a place from which governments do not recover. You do understand that people are laughing at the government.
Trevor, I'm a member of the public too. I've only been in politics for a year. I come from a background of serving the country with the military, the National Crime Agency, and that's what I'm continuing. So I'm just as livid, as is the Home Secretary, but we're acting on it. And that's why we're seeing these
They
changes.
just think it's now ridiculous that you guys keep saying we're furious, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but actually it's a shambles.
When you inherit a system that's so broken, it takes time to fix it. And we've already seen, for example, processing of migrants increase by 50% because that had ground to a halt. That means there's more deportations, including of foreign national offenders. And we're looking to move people out of hotels. 400 hotels were open when we came to government. That's down to 200, and we're moving them to military sites.
Some of them are closed under the Tories.
So there is a lot of work to do, and we're getting on with it. And the Home Secretary has been really clear that we'll do what it takes to secure the borders and ensure the system works.
Let's talk about the announcement you're making today that you've had 11,000 raids in the period between October 24 and September 25 on car washes, nail bars, all that. It's led to 8,000 arrests. How many of those 8,000 have been deported? Well,
firstly, it's really important that we don't allow the British workers to be undercut by dodgy employers, and that's why we've increased these raids by 63%. That's the most we've ever seen in British history. That's how seriously we're taking this. Of that 8,000, we've deported 1,000, and then 7,000 are currently under conditions, depending on the case. So it might be that they're reporting, it might be they're in detention, awaiting removal.
So you've got 11,000 raids, you get 8,000 people, so it means 3,000 raids haven't got a result. And actually, of the 8,000 you've arrested, only 1,000 have been deported. It's not much of a
Well, no,
hit rate,
because
is it?
we've been in government for, 15 months, so it takes time to
But it doesn't matter how long you've been in.
what we're seeing...
You're sending home 1 in 8 that you've been arrested.
And all the others are awaiting removal and on conditions, strict conditions, with the Home Office, some in detention. So the important thing here is that we're moving in the direction of taking on dodgy employers, taking out those who are working in that market, but we're also closing loopholes, Trevor. So we see a lot of these delivery drivers knocking around. A lot of those are illegal. Okay. So we're closing that loophole so that those employers have to conduct right-to-work checks. So we're doing a lot of work here.
Okay, so besides making it to take longer for me to get my burger, I can understand the point. But let me just ask you about the wider implications of this. Let me ask you this way. Do you know how many illegal immigrants there are in this country?
Well, it's hard to quantify because there was a period under the Conservatives where the boats weren't all being intercepted, and there's also other covert routes that people come in. But our priority is getting a grip of that and also dealing with those staying.
2,000? Is it 20,000? Is it 200,000? Is it 2 million? What is the order?
I'm not going to try and guess a figure, Trevor, but what I will make really clear is the policies that we're putting in place will help secure the border and also ensure that those who are overstaying don't do that, because 40% of those who are here illegally were here on legal visas of some sort. Okay, so we're bringing that down with policies to come out.
Well, let me put this way to you. You won't tell me the number, and I suspect that's because you and the Home Office don't know. In the United States, they can tell you the number. They can tell you it's 13.7 million. Germany, they can tell you it's 263,000. France, they can tell you it's 118,000. The Pew Research Centre, which is the best estimate of all of this, said this year, March, that they think the number's about 800,000. You've told me already that you deported 1,000. That means...
Well, we've deported over 35,000 since coming to government, and that's going to increase.
But the point I want to make is the chances of being deported are actually quite slim. Even if I took your numbers, quick arithmetic in my head, 1 in 25 chance of being deported if you find me. I mean, honestly, it's not very impressive. The likelihood of your being able to get these people out of the country at the rate you're going and using the methods you're using is really quite tiny.
No, I completely disagree. That this is about ensuring that, firstly, the rules are abided by. So when people are entering illegally, we are ensuring that if they can't get the asylum claim, they are deported. And those deportations have increased significantly. That's the route that we're going down, and we'll continue doing that.
One last question. Budget on November the 26th. Mm-hmm. We're hearing, everybody knows there's going to be a tax rise. We're hearing that the Chancellor's still saying there won't be tax rises on working person. Now, what is a working person now?
A working person for me is someone who's receiving a salary, paying tax, paying national insurance.
Elon Musk is a working person. He gets a salary, pays tax, but his salary is $1 trillion. What is a working person in your terms?
Well, Elon Musk is a multi-billionaire in the United States. A working person is probably most of the viewers who get their wage slip every month.
But you're a working person.
They pay their tax.
You're a working person.
Insurance.
You're paid the north of 80,000. What is a working person for the Chancellor?
A working person is someone who pays their tax, their national insurance, and look, there's different definitions, and I haven't spoken to Rachel about this, I'm talking from my view, and it's people that aren't able to save, $1,000, $2,000 a month like many extremely lucky people are. So, the people that I speak to in my constituency who are getting to the end of the month and they've hardly got a penny to rub together, they're the people that we need to fight for to ensure that they're getting the services that they deserve. It's about creating a state that stands up for working people and delivers services, not what the Conservatives want, which is austerity, cuts and division. It's about bringing the country together.
So there's not really going to be any tax rises
people.
for anybody, because you're not giving me a threshold.
There's no chance, Trevor, that I'm going to sit here tonight and try and preempt what Rachel Reeves will do at the next budget.
More than my job's worth. Mike Tapp, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Well, that story we've just been discussing is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the political commentator Adam Bolton and the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Baroness Foster. Right, let's bring in our dynamic duo for this evening. Former Labour advisor and author of Keir Starmer, the biography, Tom Baldwin, and broadcaster and former government advisor, Mercy Muroki. Mercy, before we get into the detail, this has been an extraordinary week. And I think the problem in politics is that sometimes, no matter how clever, what great case you've got, people stop listening to you. Is the government getting close to that place?
I think that's absolutely right. I think they have become a laughing stock, and it's actually quite right that they have, because this entire incident has been a complete farce. You just couldn't make up how horrendous it is that this has happened, that it does go into sort of being hilarious. But what is not hilarious, actually, is the fundamental fact that this man was convicted of a sexual offence against a child, and then he was let back out onto the streets. God knows how that happened, and I know there's going to be an inquiry into that. But we're really lucky, actually, that this man did not go on to commit another offence, did not go on to do something even worse. So it has been a complete laughingstock. I'm personally glad he is off the streets. But there's also a fundamental point, which you alluded to there, which is that there are no disincentives. That the system currently completely incentivises people to come here, stay illegally, if they've come legally, to overstay. And there are no disincentives built into the government's current immigration plans. The one-in, one-out system is a complete joke. As you mentioned, somebody went out and came back in. It's a complete joke.
Let's come back to the actual mechanics of the system. But, Tom, the politics of it are pretty horrendous for the government.
Look, there's a lot of commentary about this from you and everyone else. I do think you have to separate the politics and the policy from how it's implemented on the ground. Look, there's no one in government, there's no minister saying, oh, let's let this bloke out. That was a mistake by someone on the ground, demonstrating a complete lack of common sense. It's not exactly he's a low-profile offender, right? He's probably a celebrity in that HMP Chelmsford, right? He was on the front page of papers. He was leading the bulletins. Someone decided, oh, no, you're out. And then he came back and they said, no, you're out, and pointed him to a train station. That's not a minister doing that. That is someone who doesn't show a slightest bit of common sense. I don't think a minister said, oh, he's causing trouble before he gets on a plane. Let's give him £500. That, again, is someone operate on the ground. So, yes, we can have we can have a discussion about the policy. You have a discussion about what decisions ministers make. But I think it is a bit sort of weird to say no one's listening to government, people are laughing at government, because incompetent officials showing no common sense have basically screwed up.
Tom, I was at school a long time ago, but I think the lesson still applies. They used to say once is an incident, twice is coincidence, and the third time is enemy action. But the problem is not the one thing or that thing. It is that there's been a string of these problems. And that surely tells you something about, as it were, the failure of the state. And nobody believes that there should be a minister at the gates of a jail. Nobody believes that. But there is something that's going wrong, isn't there?
No, but I mean, so you started this piece by saying people are laughing at the government.
Well, they are.
People have been given up listening to the government. I don't think a minister is actually responsible for those cock-ups. It's not their fault, right? What there is as failures of the system. Now, accidental releases from prison, they've been rising every year since 2021. There's a problem with the system. The investment in prison service has been cut by 25% in real terms over the last 14 years. So that is a problem. That is why you get mistakes. That's why you get people not demonstrating common sense. So look, I'm not here just to defend every minister. I just think it's ridiculous to say no one is going to ever trust this government at all because someone screwed up on the ground.
Nobody said that. And by the way, it's worth saying, last time a Home Secretary lost his job, it was a Labour Home Secretary, Charles Clarke, 2005. That was before austerity. Mercy.
Well, fine, we can't blame a minister for one release, or this release, or that release, accidental release. I understand that. However, what we can blame ministers for and what we can blame this particular government for is that they came in and promised that they had a solution. They were against the Rwanda plan. They said they would come up with a solution to curb illegal entries into the country. And actually the opposite has happened. And that is something we can blame the government for. Already at this point in the year, illegal arrivals are more than they were for the whole of last year. What happened to the plan the government supposedly have? The one-in, one-out scheme, OK, fine, it's a pilot, but we know the numbers are tiny and we know it doesn't even work because it's already
Can you remind me how many people got deported on the Rwanda scheme?
Well, it was never implemented.
No, but what was the number? You talk about the tiny numbers here. What was the number? What was the number in Rwanda?
This scheme has been implemented.
The number was zero. The number was zero.
The scheme has been implemented, and it's already proven
to have failed. It's a pilot scheme.
It's a pilot scheme. Somebody was deported.
The difference is they've actually...
Somebody was deported, and they came back in on a dinghy. That's a ridiculous system.
Can I just ask you both something? Away from the politics, is there a problem with the actual state machine? I mean, whatever the governments decide to do and not do, what seems to have been coming through in the last week is that whatever ministers want to do, whether it's good or bad or not, they can't get it done.
Look, I think that's an important point. I'm told that they don't even have computer systems. They don't have a digital system for the release of prisoners. They're doing it on paper. You've got people who are, so there's a paper error, it goes through, there's no checks, there's a complete lack of investment in the state, a complete lack of investment in public services, including the prison service, and that, I'm afraid, Mercy, is part of what, the government's trying to clear up from the last government.
Well, I do agree there is a lack of investment, and there has been, admittedly, and that's very clear for all to see. And I'm sure we'll get into later what this particular government is going to do about it. But I actually don't think they have the solutions necessary to allow for more investment into public services. I think things are going to get worse.
Yeah. Personally, I think the first thing is get rid of the quill pens. Now, you're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, Prime Minister refuses to rule out whether he'll stand by Labour's manifesto pledge not to raise taxes. And the Prime Minister's Questions Time clash with Kemi Badenoch. We'll be looking ahead to the autumn budget next.
People want intelligent news, but it can be done in a less buttoned-up way.
Have a conversation in the same way that people do at home. Sophie is the best in the business.
If politicians are not answering the question, I'm not going to let them get away with that. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous. And there is nobody better to cut through the noise than Wilf.
You did say there wouldn't be further tax hikes. You can no longer make that promise. Mornings with Ridge and Frost. I literally can't wait to get going.
Play it cool, Wilf. Play it cool.
Welcome back. Let's turn to the economy now, as Keir Starmer today refused to say whether he stands by Labour's pledge not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT. He was challenged over the contents of the upcoming budget at Prime Minister's Questions by the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch.
Labour promised not to increase income tax, not to increase national insurance and not to increase VAT. Does the Prime Minister still stand by his promises?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the Leader of the Opposition is now finally talking about the economy. I can update the House, Mr. Speaker. Retail sales are higher than expected. Inflation is lower than expected. Growth has been upgraded this year. And, Mr. Speaker, the UK stock market is at an all-time high. The budget is on the 26th of November, and we will lay out our plans. But I can tell the House now that we will build a stronger economy, we will cut NHS waiting lists and deliver a better future for our country.
So that was quite a detailed answer to that question from the Conservative leader. The answer was much simpler when Kemi Badenoch put the same question on tax rises as the Prime Minister back in July.
Mr. Speaker, in their manifesto last year, Labour promised not to increase income tax, not to increase national insurance and not to increase VAT. Does the Prime Minister still stand by his promises?
Yes.
Well, let's bring in Tom and Mercy again. Actually, both of you have had the experience of briefing ministers for performance at the dispatch box. Just analyse for me, to start with you, Tom, the difference is there a difference in those answers, or is it just semantics?
Part of the difference is the context and the date. Answering a question in July, several months before a budget, is very different to the ritual dance that we go through, media and politics, in the run-up to a budget. And you go, will you rule out that? Oh, he's not ruling that out. And they can't rule it out because that's giving away a budget. So, it's quite, it's low-hanging fruit for Kemi Badenoch to do this because she knows he can't reveal. Behind it, though, is something I think a bit more significant because there is a debate about whether to do something big to break one of these three pledges, which they bent over backwards to stick to, despite the economic circumstances they've inherited, or whether to try and generate the money from elsewhere. And I've spoken to quite a few of them over the last few days, and the answer is they haven't yet decided. It's a big, big decision. There's a lot of politics in it, and it'll probably go to the wire.
Still debating between number 10 and number 11?
Inside number 11, inside number 10, elsewhere in the government. This is a huge decision, and I don't think it's fallen one way or the other yet.
You, Mercy, I know you've actually had the job of briefing the Leader of the Opposition when she's in a different job. What was going on there?
I wouldn't agree necessarily that it's low-hanging fruit to ask the Prime Minister whether he's going to stick to one of his key manifesto pledges. I think the country do want to know at every given moment if the government's going to do what they said they would and why they voted them in for. I actually think there was a huge change in tone there, and I don't think it's just because you don't want to reveal too much. You're 1 month away or whatever from the budget. I do think it's because the reality has dawned on them that they can no longer blame the Conservative government for why there's a black hole or why they have to do this, that and the other. This economic situation is getting worse, and the problem is they tied themselves into a policy that actually, realistically, it might be sensible to have to do. They might have to raise taxes, and actually they could have told a story if they hadn't locked themselves into this policy. Perhaps they could have, U-turned and sort of told a story of why they were doing it. But this constant locking themselves in, I think, really will kind of be their undoing, because the story that will be told to the country if they do that, is that they're rowing back on their promises and that they're not for working people.
There are a couple of cages here for the Charter, aren't there, Tom? One is the fiscal rules, and the other is no rise in income tax, VAT, or national insurance. She's probably got to get rid of one of them. What do you think? Either the fiscal rules or maybe one of those three things she might change on?
No, there are various schemes which have been written about at length to suggest that she could raise the money needed by not breaking those pledges. The question is whether then she has enough headroom and whether we're just going to be back here in another year's time. Look, I don't think it's right that we've passed the point where they can't blame the last government, because the big thing that's changed, and it is a big thing that's changed, is the OBR deciding to regrade productivity forecasts and productivity growth forecasts.
When you say regrade, you mean downgrade?
Yeah, and that's not based on what this government's doing. It's based on the consequences of austerity, Brexit, and the lack of investment we saw over 14 years. It's something they should have done at the end of last Parliament. They didn't, they delayed it. And suddenly, another £20 billion bill, maybe £25 billion bill, has come in from the last government.
Tom,
that's...
Are you saying that
it is the truth?
The situation we're in now, that this government has no responsibility for it?
Well, look, the government's got a huge amount of responsibility for managing the economy and not crashing the economy as other people might have done, mention no names. But what... It's only fair to point out that this is a bill from the last Parliament. This is an unexpected bill from last Parliament, and the Chancellor has to find another £25 billion she didn't have to expect to find.
OK. Mercy, do you think... What do you think, party politics aside, what do you think that Rachel Reeves' best pathway out is?
Well, what I would say is that they really do need to confront the welfare bill question, and I don't think they have been doing that so far. In fact, we've seen, you know, U-turns and watering downs of their plans from earlier in the year. And the reality is, I think the latest figure is something like 130 billion by 2030 is what we'll be spending on benefits, and 100 billion of that will be on sickness benefits alone. I think I saw 5,000 people are signing on to sickness benefits a day, every single day. That is an enormous amount of people going on to sickness benefits every year. The Chancellor does need to confront that if she's going to save some money.
Okay, 14 years to fix it.
Okay, you are watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the first compensation scheme for postmasters affected by the Capture IT scandal has been launched. Sky News speaks to the victims who say that it's a two-tier system. Welcome back. Now, the first ever compensation scheme for postmasters affected by the Capture IT scandal has been launched. Like the faulty Horizon system that followed, the software created shortfalls in branch accounts, and it led to hundreds of wrongful theft convictions. Sky's Adele Robinson has been speaking to some of the victims.
Official recognition that an injustice was done.
More than 3 decades since lives were destroyed in the Capture IT scandal.
Ended up being bankrupt, criminal record. We lost everything we possessed.
And the first official redress scheme for post office victims is launched.
I hope they will see that this scheme treats them with a bit more dignity and a bit more urgency.
But it hasn't landed well. Many victims say it's unfair compared to Horizon compensation schemes.
It's a two-tier system, one law for the Horizon victims, totally different law for us capture victims, and that's not really fair.
Steve Marston critical of how it will award payments between £10,000 and £300,000, with only exceptional cases paid more.
So I want to see it in black and white, what they consider exceptional circumstances, rather than just a vague statement to that effect.
Postmasters used capture software which caused accounting shortfalls in their branches in the 90s, before the Horizon scandal. They want equality with all victims.
The banding seems fairly arbitrary, and it doesn't seem to reflect the full scope of what some people will have suffered.
Chris's mum Liz went to jail. His dad Bill ran the post office. Both are now gone. But Chris can apply to the redress scheme, along with the first 150 victims testing it out.
I'd hate us to get to the point where this scheme's come out and we go through these 150 cases and then it's further developed and half the people it would apply to are gone. We will lose people before, they can see justice. And I think that's a terrible tragedy.
In an exclusive interview with Sky News, the Post Office Minister says he does understand why trust is so low.
Why should victims trust this process that's been put into place after seeing the Horizon schemes dogged by delays and red tape?
Well, postmasters are right to have low levels of trust in the state because they've been treated appallingly by the state. But what we've done with this scheme is to try to learn some of those lessons for where previous compensation schemes for postmasters didn't work. So we're collecting more evidence from the beginning to try to speed things up.
Can you personally guarantee speedy redress then for the capture victims?
Absolutely, that's what we are doing today, is to make sure that we have a scheme that gives people redress as quickly as possible.
While the money set aside for victims is uncapped, those with convictions can't yet apply. The real test now for government is whether redress comes swiftly and fairly for all. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, let's talk again to Tom Baldwin and Mercy Muroki. We don't want to get too far into the details of this particular issue, but I think there's an interesting question here. We see all of these things that go wrong, and we can argue about the politics and so on, but some of it is just mistakes that are made or things that nobody anticipated and so on. And somebody's got to correct it. First, understand what goes wrong, work out what the compensation might be, how you make sure it doesn't happen again. Mercy, do you think we've got, we look at Hillsborough, we look at the infected blood scandal, we look at Windrush. In the United States, they'd just go to court and there'd be gazillions of money paid out. We don't do that here. Do you think we've got a machinery that really does this well, makes people feel it's been, things have been resolved and people have been compensated properly?
I don't at all, actually. And I think part of justice is how quickly justice is done. And so I think one of the big problems we have with all those scandals you highlight and many more, I'm sure, is the length of time it takes for victims of those scandals to feel like they have got some justice, and even sometimes to even feel like the government has recognised that it was a scandal, that there was wrongdoing. And I think we really do need to have a culture within how we do government, where we get to that point much faster within the legal system, where we get to that point much faster, because as that VT alluded to there, it's, sometimes people end up passing away by the time anything's done. And we can't get to a position, really, where every time the state goes wrong, not only do we have to wait decades for the government to recognise or bring in legislation to give them redress, but, on top of that, the victims are passing away on top of that.
I'm glad we have a system which recognises injustice and recognises the need to redress injustice and recognise human dignity. I do think in previous generations we didn't do it in this way. I mean, you think back as far as the slave trade, the only people compensated were the slave owners, and we were still paying them back in 1990, I believe. Right? Your slaves never got any compensation. You look at the historical
2015.
You look at the. It was 2015, right? You look at the injustices faced by sort of people who were shot for cowardness when they were suffering terrible mental health conditions after the First World War. These were terrible injustices. I wonder whether, you know, the system we have of, you know, the public inquiry, which is part of the delay, where you have to decide what the injustice is, and, you know, there has to be a delay. And then from a first principle position, decide how much compensation everyone's due, and then the government has another huge bill. I wonder whether you know, we need to be a bit more systematic about it, because it does seem to me periodically every 6 months we're getting another one, and it has to be bigger than the last one, and I'm not sure how sustainable that is.
Interesting. OK, still to come on Politics Hub. From a feud to loving, with Robert Jenrick giving his support to a bid by Nigel Farage to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. We'll be discussing if this is an indication of the shape of things to come on the right.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, the first ever compensation scheme is launched for victims of the Post Office capture scandal. But we'll hear why some are complaining of a two-tier system. Also ahead tonight, the NHS makes the morning after pill available for free across pharmacies in England. And Sir David Attenborough backs a bid by conservationists to purchase an entire estate in Northumberland. All that and much more to come on the UK Tonight from 8.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
It's a case that has shocked, puzzled and divided the public like no other. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The story is really one of vast numbers of Unite the Kingdom supporters turning out and taking the police by surprise. I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
Jihad al-Shami, the suspected Islamist terrorist who murdered Jews on UK soil. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing. It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, did we see today the first glimmerings of things to come on the right of politics? Tory and Reform MPs joined forces to back a Commons move by Nigel Farage to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, it was voted down, but it is the biggest display of cooperation between the two parties in Parliament so far. Now, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, was, as ever, watching all that, what was happening in the Commons, and he is now going to explain to us what it means.
They went from a feud to a love-in almost, the foes of the right in British politics. It was a 10-minute rule bill. Now you're going to say to me, oh, they don't matter. Well, they don't normally, and normally the big parties just ignore them. But what happened today was the Tories got into bed with Reform and backed this 10-minute rule bill by Mr Farage. As you say, it was voted down. It was 96 in favour, 154 against. Kemi Badenoch led 87 Tory MPs into the eye lobby with the very few Reform MPs. It was Farage, Tice, Anderson, Danny Kruger, who was a teller. And the Tories provided a teller as well, John Whittingdale, the veteran Tory. But what was interesting, actually, Labour were just going to ignore it, like big parties normally do with trivial little things like 10-minute rule bills. But the pro-Europeans said, oi, if this goes through, this will be embarrassing. Farage will claim a victory. Parliament has voted to pull out of the ECHR. So the numbers against were 63 Labour, 64 Lib Dems, Jeremy Corbyn's 10 independents. But what the chamber was amazing to look at, because the corner bit where you've got the Lib Dems, Ulster MPs, Corbyn's gang, and the few Reform MPs was packed. And that's because the Lib Dems and the SNP crowded round Farage and gave him a really tough time. The Tories gazed adoringly across from their benches. Not that many Labour MPs in town. Here is a flavour of the rough ride that Nigel Farage got from the Lib Dems and the SNP sitting around him.
The British people, despite being told by all the businesses and all the trade unions and much of the press and most of this House,
Didn't you promise to leave?
managed,
Some respect to another
despite everything, children, be quiet. managed.
Order. I will be responsible for maintaining order in this chamber.
And do you wonder? It's marvellous to see the intellectual levels of debate in this place. It really is.
Putin's patsy, that was my favourite bit.
It's getting quite spicy in there, isn't it?
It was very spicy. I think it was Steve Darling, the MP with the guide dog, who shouted that out. But, yeah, it was all quite feisty. And then Sir Ed Davey got up and made a speech absolutely ripping into Farage. No love lost there. But what's interesting, of course, is the fact that the Tories could have just said, oh, it's a 10-minute rule bill, but they enthusiastically backed it. Now, afterwards, Nigel Farage tweeted this. He said, I am grateful to Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and Gavin Williamson for co-signing my ECHR withdrawal bill in the House of Commons today. I regret it was voted down. And, of course, they co-signed his bill. And, as I say, the Shadow Cabinet all voted for it. Tories and Reform UK voting together, agreeing with each other, getting on pretty well. Remember that at the Tory conference when my colleague Sam Coates tackled Robert Jenrick, what about Unite the Right? He said, oh, well, it's not a priority. Things could change. Was this the first sign of a...
Just to get one thing absolutely clear, Suella Braverman is still a Conservative MP, isn't she?
Yes, I think I'm right in saying her husband joined Reform and then came back again, or left.
That's right.
Reform.
There was a bit of a boomerang there. Mercy, is this... Are we seeing the beginnings of something?
Well, I think there is a slight danger of reading too much into it, because I do think
it's too much fun not to.
because if the Conservatives hadn't had abstained, or they wouldn't have voted against it, but Nigel Farage would have made a huge deal about it. He would have, shouted on Twitter, and he would have said, look, the Tories aren't serious about cracking down on immigration. So I do think they kind of had to go along with it. However, the broader point is the fact that they have been decimated in the polls, to be honest, as has Labour, and Reform are polling higher than any party. I think the latest YouGov poll puts them at about 27% of the vote. So I do think Reform is a force that cannot be ignored, and I think it would be unwise for the Conservatives to do that.
Tom, what do you think the Labour hierarchy thinks about this? Consolidating the right means that they've got a definite single enemy, and that's always a problem. But on the other hand, I suppose what they can do is scorn the Tories for sucking up to Farage. Where are they going to go? Where do you think they'll go on this?
I think sucking up to Farage is quite interesting decision by the Tories. Because, leaving the ECHR really is one of those wacky far-right policies. Only Belarus and Russia in the entire European continent are outside the convention, a convention signed into law by Winston Churchill's post-war government. So this is really, really wacky right-wing stuff.
To be fair, though, Tom, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, and others are now saying we've got to reform the ECHR.
They're totally different. Reforming, these rights, how you interpret them changes over time. When it was signed, we used to send gay people to jail. Our idea of rights changes over time. Of course it does. But leaving the ECHR is something that Putin and Belarus, Putin's Russia and Belarus have done the content. Yeah. And we know what, you can make the point about Farage is a bit too close to Putin and Mars Putin, the way he's handled Russia. The only reason I think the Conservatives are doing it is because they're living off these fumes from reform and they're scared of Farage, and it's a pathetic sight.
I don't think the Tories are scared of Farage. It's the fact that
following him.
People, you can't ignore the fact that 27% of the country, as if we're to believe the polls, would vote for reform if there was a general election tomorrow. That is a significant number of people to be.
Okay, well, I take John Craig's warnings always very seriously, and I think we need to watch this. That's it from us tonight. Jane Secker is going to be here tomorrow on the Politics Hub at 7. Up next, it's a UK Tonight. And Sarah Jane Mee will be following that story we discussed earlier on. I'll see you on Sunday, by the way.